So I've been open feeding and pail feeding, and I'm getting a lot of questions about why and how do I choose between the open feeding and my pail feeding strategy. You see, open feeding works really well, especially off the summer flows when you knock off all the boxes and you're left with these colonies with this huge field force yet. So they have a lot of bees available to go out and forage and bring back the syrup. You don't want to use open feeding around your neighbors. You don't want to feed their bees for one thing, and you don't want to interfere with what they're doing. So you got to stick with pails around where you're close to neighbors. We're getting on into September here, and we've kind of fallen into a bit of a cool rainy stretch. It feels kind of weird we've been so hot and dry all summer, and now we're wet and cold. So the bees aren't able to get out of the hive as quickly, as effectively to access these open feeders to bring back the syrup to their nest. So we've been putting pail feeders on. These pail feeders work really well, especially during times like this when it's a little bit colder, a little bit cooler. The bees can't get out and fly, but they can still break cluster and move up and access that syrup from the pail. So it got down to about +2 last night, which is pretty cold. It's close to freezing, but the bees, they were accessing this syrup pretty much 24 hours. Now these pails have been on for about 5 days, and I would say about 2/3 of them have been sucked down now. So they're hungry for syrup, and they're taking it down, and they're curing it and storing it away. This time of year, I get pretty aggressive on my bulk feeding because I want my bees fed up before October. October can shift into cold and just kind of sweep into winter. So I got to make sure that these hives are adequately fed before October, so that I know that this syrup is stored away and cured properly before they drift into winter. The nests are hatching out now, and there's a lot of space to backfill. So we'll fill these colonies up to 85 pounds, up 95 pounds, whatever, per hive. And I like to feed my hives right up for winter, just to satisfy those big ones going in. So this has been about 4 days. This one's practically empty. So they'll take the second pail a lot slower than they've taken this first one. So that one's just about empty. So what I'm going to do is, in these yards that I'm pail feeding, if the weather doesn't improve, I'll be filling these pails up again and then bulking these colonies right up with the pails. If the weather shifts and we start getting some flight weather where the bees can go out and access these open feeders again, I'll likely top up the last of these colonies with the open feeders. Just get these pails off and just let them access the open feeder. But by having the option of using open feeder or pail feeding, it gives me the ability to, adjust to the exact condition that's out there. So through the cold and rainy and wet weather, they're still taking the syrup down through these pails and then later on, if we see an opportunity to get some flight weather, we'll put some open feed out just to top these colonies off and let them prepare that nest perfectly. So as you can see, these guys are sucking down the syrup, and it's kind of wet at the entrance, and they're fanning. You can see that. I can feel it's just a nice warm airflow coming out. So they're drying down that syrup. The condensation is on the doorstep there. That's really cool. See how much they got out of here. Yeah, so they've drank most of that pail down, and they're curing it, storing it away for winter. What I don't like about these feeder pails is the drip. Some of these pails drip and the colonies can't keep up to it. And these guys are actively consuming it, but there's some waste syrup around the edges. And what happens is it drips onto the bottom board, soaks the cluster, and with the sucrose it dries on them and it forms little crystals, and they actively leave the nest and groom it off outside. See the little crystals here? Just because of the drip of the syrup, this sucrose, It's overwhelming them, and they can't process it quick enough. These poor little guys. So this is one disadvantage of these pails, is that relentless and drip sometimes when the pails don't keep a seal, or the bees can't take it quick enough. So that's why I like to, if I'm going to pail feed them, I'm going to drop a pail into them nice and quick, and then I'll finish them up with open feed, and then they can take whatever they need. If they don't need it, they won't get it. If they need it, they'll finish themselves up with it. You can see the bees fanning in the front there. Just a real warm, moist flow of air leaving that entrance.